our English teachers, they started saying, these kids are coming in and they're not reading on grade level. We're really struggling. We're not reading teachers. We're English teachers.
Right.
And, but we started having to think differently about that.
This is the Literacy Mindset Podcast, where education leaders discuss identifying and removing phonological barriers with Mindplay's CEO, Jeff Pendleton.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm very excited for another episode of the Literacy Mindset. Very excited for my guest today, Dr. Stephanie Howard, the superintendent of Midland ISD. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, no, very excited to dive into a number of things that you've got going on, a lot of successes since you've been there, and I think we're excited to talk about those. Maybe if you can, orient the audience just a little bit about your background and how it is that you got into the seat where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is year 31 for me. Spent 14 years here in Midland before leaving the district for about 10 years, and then came back as the superintendent in January of 2023. And so this coming January will be 3 years. My background before moving into leadership was a high school English teacher. So talking about literacy, we saw that the end of the K-12 experience as a high school English teacher, and then of course a secondary principal, 3 years at the junior high and 6 at the high school. So it wasn't really until I got into the superintendency that the literacy piece started, I started getting more involved in that. Obviously, as a high school principal, we were talking to our feeder campuses about what we were seeing and how do we address this. But it wasn't until I sat in the superintendent seat that, I started having the opportunity to truly work with K-2.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm excited to dive into some of the nuance there. Can you just really quickly to orient us to Midland? What's the makeup of the district, about the size for those that are unfamiliar?
Yeah, so we're here in Midland, Texas, oil and gas community, and a little over 100,000 people in our community. That is different than it was when I first got here, when we were closer to 90,000. We
Okay.
have 29,300 students, approximately about 3,200 employees, 40 campuses. We just opened our newest elementary in August, and that was a result of a bond back in 2023. We have 10 schools of choice, and so some of those have existed for, 15 or so years. Others are new. We do have some in-district partners, and then we have some partners through 1882 partnerships. And so a lot of opportunities, and we have 2 large high schools. We have 5 high schools, but 2 comprehensive 6A
Okay.
high schools. And right now, the way the district is structured, our elementaries are pre-K 6, and
Okay.
then our junior highs are 7, 8, and high school, we have freshman centers and then 10, 12 campuses.
Oh, okay.
With the bond, we'll be doing grade reconfiguration in 28, 29, and at that point, we'll have the PK5 elementary, 6, 8 middle school, 9 through 12 high school experience. So a
Okay.
little unique in that regard. That's not the typical grade configuration across the state, and so we're looking forward to being able to reconfigure.
Okay. Yeah, aligned closer to the typical configuration. Okay. Well, I'm excited to dive in. I feel like some pretty major successes since you've been there in increasing the number of A and B campuses, reducing the number of F campuses. How do you, as you come into a role, how do you decide where to start? Obviously, literacy is a big part of what we want to talk about today. But like, how did you start where you want to go there?
Yeah, so coming into the district in January of 2023, we had a lot of needs, many areas to focus on. And to your point, how do you pick what to focus on? And it'd be nice to say we're just going to focus on 2 or 3, but that isn't the reality.
Right.
So that, first semester, it was not as much figuring out what needed to happen, because having been in the district and having been around the community, um, but we went to work on getting out on our campuses and listening.
Okay.
What is it that is working? And honestly, that first semester, that list was very short, and the list of what do we need to do better was very long. And so we just started trying to tackle that. If there were items listed that we could fix, that day or tomorrow, we would do that. But there
Got
were
it.
some items, like we need new curriculum. Well, you don't typically start that in January, February, March, right?
Right.
And so we had to kind of prioritize what can we, make better right away, and what are some things we're going to need to do in the coming year or years. And so we used all of that data that we gathered through the being out on campuses, collecting notes. And then we brought in about 100 people across the community, leaders, teachers, to do a strategic plan. Basically, looked at all of our needs and landed on our strategic plan that we're now in year 3 of. And so, with that initial plan, we had, I believe, 28 initiatives. So most people would tell you that's way too many. But I was
Yeah.
speaking in the community one day, and people that knew what we had inherited said you probably had about 50 and narrowed it down to 28. And I said, that's exactly right.
Fair.
So we really had to do that. Of course, in a big district, 28 initiatives doesn't mean the same people are doing 28
Right.
things. You have a team of people, and so we really, worked it that way. Now, what we did have to do, so we going into that first full year, we implemented consistent ELAR curriculum K through 8.
Okay.
And then we really needed to implement math, but we had to think about how quick can teachers
Do
take
well.
on something new, right? If I'm at the elementary, I may be teaching both reading and math. And if I have 2 new curriculum resources, 2 new things to learn and implement and do well, I'm not going to be as effective as if I do it one at a time. So last year, we brought in the K-5 math, and then this year we brought in the 6 through Algebra 1 math. And so we really had to be mindful of how quickly we could move, even though we knew we needed to do it all at once, it felt like.
Right.
But we did start with the ELAR and the phonics-based instruction, structured literacy at the K2 levels, because that absolutely was a priority. And then, of course, a foundation for all the other learning.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting one I'd like to maybe dive into a little bit deeper. You came up sort of as a high school English teacher, like you said, and that's where you cut your teeth in teaching, and you sort of described that, there you get to see sort of the end of the spectrum where you know what strong readers look like, you know what struggling readers look like, but you're not schooled in how do I teach phonics, or how do I teach, initial reading skills. So how is it that you kind of have come to this leadership style of, we're going phonics based, we're going, a really important K2 or pre-K2 literacy? Where did that come from? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So, when you're working and leading projects or big initiatives or change efforts in areas that are not your area of background or expertise, you bring in people around you that is their area of expertise.
Yeah, I love that.
And when you get out and listen to the teachers, and especially the best teachers, they'll tell you what works, and they'll tell you, I joked with them that first semester I was back, and I said, the great teachers, y'all have been shutting your doors and using phonics all along, right?
Right.
But it's the new people. And at that time, almost 40% of our teachers had less than 5 years experience. And so it's the teachers that don't know to shut their door and use phonics that are
Right.
doing what they're told, and it wasn't being effective. We also then, of course, had staffing issues that we had to deal with. So we were putting subs in classrooms. Of course, if I'm not trained to teach a kid how to read as a secondary teacher, a substitute teacher is certainly not trained to teach a
Right.
kid how to read. And so, when it's not your area of expertise, you have to bring those people in that are the experts, and do the research, listen to them, and then rely on a strong recommendation coming from the people who it is their area of
Yeah.
expertise.
No, I love that. And so one of the things we talked about earlier in preparation was what does it look like, beyond the initial reading, and that's where an intervention starts to come in to play. And so can you just describe to us sort of your intervention? Do you have a framework that you use to go by, and a couple of those things maybe?
So, I think I want to back up a little bit. Back in 2005, when I was a junior high principal in this district,
Okay.
that was when we started having discussions about with our English teachers. They started saying, these kids are coming in and they're not reading on grade level. We're really struggling. We're not reading teachers. We're English teachers.
Right.
And but we started having to think differently about that. It was at that time the district started looking at instructional software and programs that could fill those gaps that had not been dealt with back in K2 and third grade and so forth. And so that was really my first experience with starting to use technology and software that could meet a kid where they were and bring them to where they need to be. Of course, that's evolved. There's so many more options now
Right.
than there were back then. Um, but that's something that now I think we've gotten a lot better at. There's
Okay.
multiple um, programs out there, and everybody thinks theirs is the best. And really being mindful about what we use, and then the big thing too for education in general is teachers are used to things changing every year. They don't
Right.
like it, but when you start with something and then next year, never mind, we're going to use something else, and next year we're going to try something else. We've tried to be very cognizant of that and really show our teachers that we're going to be committed to district-wide structures. We're going to give it time to work. We'll certainly, tweak it as we go or
Yeah.
take that feedback. And if something isn't working at all, then of course we have to go a different direction.
Sure.
But trying to be mindful that we have to give something time to work. Because otherwise, that's what, when I got back to the district, that had 5 superintendents in 5 years, and so much turnover at the district level. And so there was a real while we had so much to do and so much to change, quite frankly, there was a real desire for some consistency. So we had to be very mindful of what we chose to do in that first year and second year, and show that we were going to build those bring back those basics, and then build on that every single year, so that they could buy in and feel like we really are headed in the right direction, and we're not going to change directions every single school year and go a completely different, route.
Yeah.
So
And how's that been received? It seems like you would say that, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm sure teachers love that. Has that been the general response?
yes, in fact, I shared I do the listen and learns, and so that first semester I was here, I had to do 39 of them in a semester. Now, these last couple of years, I'm able to start those in September and then finish them up in
Right.
March, so a couple a week. But what we do during that time is we talk about our strategic plan. We celebrate the successes from last year and the work we did and what caused that. And then we talk about what are we doing this year that builds on that. And that's very well received. In fact, last spring when we were out on campuses, one of the things that some teachers ask is, please don't change our curriculum resources. Right? Even
Hey.
though a year before there was pushback, it's new
Right.
and this is hard. But when you get down the road with it and you give people time to learn it, to use it, to be supported in it, we were actually hearing, please don't take this away. And
Yeah.
so, that to me is when you know that it's starting to work. And we've tried to be very mindful of how do we layer the professional development
Right.
and professional learning for teachers, and not expect them to just take everything and make it all happen in day one. And that's where that ongoing coaching and support comes in.
Yeah, I love that. In secondary schools, if you will, when you think about intervention and then the lack of initial training on foundational skills, what are the things that you guys are doing to sort of help the 6th through 12th grade teachers that may have students that do show up with phonics gaps or other early foundational skills on that? Do you have interventionists? Do you have structured PD that kind of helps them through that? How do you guys do
Well,
that?
of course, the professional learning, but we're really relying more on instructional software for that. To
Got it.
expect a junior English teacher to go back and teach a student to read on top of what they do with 150 to 160 students a day, that's just not feasible. And to pull them out of instruction to take them over to do that kind of work is not good either. Which class are they going to miss? Because then they're missing that content they need there. And so really relying on instructional software and being tight around the number of minutes they have to have with that each week. Of course, giving
Yeah.
them ideas for how they can structure that and work that
Right.
into the classroom. But definitely that professional learning, and also um, reminding them of the work we're doing to try to work them out of that kind of job down the road.
Right.
And there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's a great support system for them so they can focus on what they do best. Um, Speaking of technology, and you sort of described the use of it in some cases. How do you make decisions? I think earlier you said there's so much of it out there. How do you think about um, when pedagogy leads, when, does it work on our devices, has to be an important part of that. Have you developed sort of technology decision-making frameworks that help guide you? Oh, is there anything you can offer on that front?
Yeah. So our teaching and learning team and then our instructional technology team work together on that.
Love it.
And so, obviously we can't pick a product that we love on the teaching and learning side, but we don't have the devices or
Or
infrastructure or network to support. And so they have started working very closely together on that. And then also some of the instructional technology training can be supported better through instructional technology than through the, say, ELAR coordinator.
right,
And but then also trying to bring that together because teachers have limited time. And so if they're sitting in an ELAR training, they're getting that embedded instructional technology training with them, with it. So
right,
but definitely, I mean, it's we can't go pick what works for a device, but pedagogically it doesn't work. And so
right.
those two teams have to work together.
Yeah, I love hearing that. Sometimes that seems to be a tension in districts that, one hand maybe isn't talking to the other, but the fact that you can pull them together and that they work together on that,
Now, I
that's
can't say
great.
we're perfect at it, but that's what we work
Yeah.
towards.
No, hey, that's working towards it. I think is an important part of the battle. Uh, okay. Since I have two daughters that are in high school, I have a ninth grader and a senior. Right now, I like asking this question as you think about it from a superintendent, and that is social media and its impact. n- there are social and emotional sides to that, but its impact on writing. Like my daughters give me the hardest time when I use punctuation in my text messaging.
Right.
And so how do you guys think about like creating this framework where, okay, great, that's what you do in texting, but here's how we write format. Does that come up? Do you guys talk about that, or is it something you just kind of have to try and survive?
Yes. Well, so fortunately in Texas, we have the new law about no cell phones during the school day. So that's starting to help students just engage better, focus, pay
Right,
attention. So that is a positive thing. From the writing perspective, even back when I was a teacher, we didn't deal with the texting and social media the way that we deal with it now. But any strong English teacher is talking about the audience, right?
right,
There's a time where you write informally. There's a time where you're writing formally. To this day, I won't use a contraction in a newsletter or something like that because that we don't do
yeah.
that in
Ingrained
formal
it. Right,
writing.
right, right.
And I even teach our communications team that they do a lot of writing for me. And I remind them, unless this is a very casual email we're sending out about something, we don't use contractions. We spell all the words out.
Love it.
My own two daughters, I have one that's starting her MBA and one that's a sophomore in high school. And I punctuate all of my text messages. I correct their text messages if they misspell a word,
That's so
because
good.
I do think that's just that continuous teaching of that and making them good writers. They both actually are very good writers, and that is not to my credit because I'm a believer. It's not my job to do their work at home. They have to learn it the way that we all learned it. I will proofread for them if they ask. The oldest one did all the time, but the youngest one never asked me to proofread anything, but is doing very well in her pre-AP English class. But I think that's going back to our ELAR coordinator, Jennifer Garcia, was one of my high school teachers when I was a principal, and she's very good at leading with excellence and making sure that we're out there teaching students to be good writers and good formal writers. And so that's something that I think is important, and I definitely think it sets people apart. When you get written communication from someone and it's not well written, people can be judgmental. And as a high school principal, if one of our teachers sent something out, the English teachers or department was grading it,
Right.
and sometimes could be ugly about that. But we are educators and we have to be good communicators and good writers. So
Yeah. No, for sure. Oh, well, I really appreciate the time. It's been a really fun conversation that we've been able to have. Maybe lastly, if you can leave us, what's one thing that you are most excited about as you think about the future of education?
yeah, so when I think about the future, I'm going to talk about Midland. And so,
Okay.
these last almost 3 years, we've worked really hard to lay some strong foundations, and we're starting to see those results pay off. You mentioned our ratings. When I got here, 7 of our campuses were A's and B's. This last year, 14 of them were, so we've
That's
doubled
amazing.
that. But on the other end, when I got here, 16 of our campuses were DNFs, and we're down to 9. And we had 9 Fs when I got here, and we're down to 1. And so
Wow.
we've really tried to attack this from a systems level, and building those strong foundations. There's you can go put a quick fix on a quick uh, solution, but it doesn't solve the problem long term. And so there's that balance sometimes when you have a school and school improvement, but we're starting to see that pay off. And so what's exciting for me is when I'm at a junior high, like I was this first week of school, and a 7th grade teacher tells me the kids are coming to us stronger this year. They're stronger than they were last year. Well, that
That's
means
good.
we're doing something right.
Right.
When I'm, at an elementary campus, and the 3rd grade teachers are telling us that they're seeing their kids come in more prepared and reading at a higher level. And when I first got those, beginning of year results back, I almost questioned it because I'm not used to them being, like they are. And so
Right.
those are those wins that we have to remember, because the day-to-day work is hard. It gets, grueling. But when you hear those types of things, we have to really lift those up so that people start to see that we're moving the needle.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that, and congratulations on all the success so far. I wish you continued success, and thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Jeff.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Learn how we help students by identifying and removing phonological barriers at mindplay.com.